Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. In this episode, we are joined by Albina Mamonkina, an inquisitive and hardworking student currently completing the JD MBA program at Osgoode Hall Law School and Schulich School of Business at York University in Toronto, Canada. Diana and Albina begin their discussion by reflecting on the student experience during the COVID pandemic lockdown and its impact on the social aspect of school life. They continue their discussion, examining ways to preempt team conflicts on school projects that we can all use on our team projects. And they conclude their discussion by offering students advice on building their professional presence as they embark on their work careers. Now let's have a conversation.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Diana Kowarski, and we are at another episode of the Soft Skills Salon podcast. We are going to be spending time today with Albina Mamonkina, and she is someone who I am delighted to have as a guest, as well as someone I like to call friend. Albina has completed her third year of the joint JD MBA program at Osgoode Hall Law School and the Schulich School of Business. Prior to law school, she obtained an honors in International Bachelor of Business Administration at the Schulich School of Business of York University, where she also went on an exchange to the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. Albina has been starting her legal career in corporate law at Osler, Hoskin, and Harcourt, and in her free time, she plays tennis, runs, rock climbs, and walks her dog, Oscar, although I think free time is a rarity for Albina. I like to think that she has that balance and all the skills to do all those activities and be a full-time student and work at the law firm very, very, very soon. Welcome, Albina.
Thank you for having me. Definitely more free time while I'm in school. Not sure how that's going to change.
Fair enough. So I was trying to remember how long we've known each other, and I think it's at least a handful of years that you were somewhere in your undergraduate work when we first met. Does that sound about right?
I think close to 6 years. I was in my second year of my undergrad.
Right. And the program that you're in now, the JD MBA, is how many years in total?
It's 4 years.
A 4-year program. Okay, great. And so you have one more year ahead of you. Are you keen to be in school for many, many more years, or are you feeling you're almost done?
Oh, I'm glad to be done. I think 8 years of school is enough.
8 years, perhaps so. And some of that time actually has been during a rather exceptional moment or so on the planet in consideration of COVID. And it's a great way for us to segue to one of the pre-selected questions from our soft skills impact questionnaire that Albina was kind enough to sort through. And she landed on question number 4, which is our starting point, which reads, how do you compare pre-COVID soft skills to what I've called moving beyond COVID soft skills at work? And forgive me, Albina, I'm just not committed yet to post-COVID, and I have no language other than moving beyond that sounded positive. Nonetheless, what are your thoughts? Where can we begin?
I think COVID really has taught people to be more empathetic and just more understanding of people's situations. Before we were coming into work, we had a lot of expectations, a lot of pressures. And then when kind of COVID happened, we had a lot of difficult conversations, whether it's family related, mental health, just the burnout, or people dealing with the situation as a whole. So I really think people became more understanding, and I would say even nicer, knowing that people are dealing with all these different situations and external environments that are so different for everybody. And I really hope that continues moving forward to be more understanding of everyone, understanding that mental health is a big portion of this, and that it's really hard to be very isolated and just work and study and not really have anything else happening.
Absolutely. And you raised some important points here. And I'd say to you that empathy, understanding, and niceness at times have been the byproduct, not the goal of some of our interactions. And perhaps during this COVID era, we've had an opportunity, again, as a byproduct, to do some self-analysis around how it is that we're interacting with others. And as you said, there are some difficult conversations that have had to take place because of, well, either by choice or for a while by circumstance, being geographically dispersed and having to make do with what we could while we were being asked to work from our homes as much as possible. So can you give me a little bit more of your thoughts from a student perspective about that idea of studying and working and the isolation that we physically were experiencing? Did it have any implications in terms of isolation socially? What do you think?
No, I definitely agree. I started my JD MBA program my first year as the MBA side, and we were still in person before pre-COVID, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a great start to my program. Met a lot of people on the MBA side. I was part of a lot of extracurriculars and just interacting with my professors and my peers on a daily basis. And then towards the end, when March 2020 hit, that all really shifted super quickly for me. And that's when it didn't really hit me then, because it was only 3 weeks left of my semester and it was summer vacation and work. And it was very nice being remote for work and having a bit more free time where you're not commuting, and you have more time to be with your family, your puppy, your friends, or just even outdoors. But I think for me, it became really apparent how difficult this is when I started my law school journey. So after my MBA, I started my first year of law school, and there was some hope that we'll be back in person.
Right.
That kept changing with everything that kept happening. And my first year was online, and it was really difficult to just meet people, build those connections, or even get close to my professors, because they are all coming from various backgrounds. They have a lot of experience in various areas. And back when we were in person, you could chat with them after class and maybe clarify some things. But here you just felt like a little square on Zoom. Half the time those squares became black as people stopped turning on their cameras.
Right.
So it just, I don't know, it just me in my room. And that was my year. And it was really, I think it was really tough on myself and everybody else in my program as well.
Absolutely. And, the student perspective on the social isolation during this COVID era, I think is in fact, I know is a very important one, because that's going to be a snapshot of your experience that you don't have a chance to redo that year. And, that is always going to be the experience that you have coming forward and taking you into your career as you advance. And what you raise are some observations around, again, the byproduct of working remotely and working on a virtual platform like Zoom, of being reduced to a little black tile with your video off and perhaps your name, or being reduced to the image if you chose to have your video on. You mentioned in your answer the opportunity, or perhaps the different access to opportunities of having conversations with classmates and or professors. So what did you do? Because it was a whole school year, right? How did you manage to connect?
It was definitely challenging, especially if you were more introverted or you're more shy.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to put yourself out there. And that was kind of my approach. I joined several clubs. I tried to go to different events, reach out to people. I remember on the first day of one of my classes, we were talking about what kind of law we wanted to do. And then a girl in my small group mentioned she's interested in corporate law. And so I sent her a message, and now we're friends. And we became our friendship grew so much after that, but it really had to be on my initiative to make that first step and really reach out and start that conversation. Sometimes those conversations wouldn't really go anywhere after that 30-minute talk or 20-minute back and forth. Other times it blossomed into great relationships. We worked together where we ended up being part of the same clubs, and it really took a lot of effort on myself and making that conscious effort to reach out to people.
And you talk about that effort as initiative. Can you give me one specific example? What did you do to get yourself to initiate? Because there's a lot involved there. We throw that word around, right? So I had to take the initiative or put myself out there. And At times, I know in working with some of the people who I coach, those terms seem very elusive, right? What does it actually mean? What is it that I would actually do to take initiative? So as a student, what did you actually do in one example?
I think for me, initiative just means making that first step, whatever that is for people. A big one for me was networking. It was something I was
Mhm.
not very comfortable with, especially online.
Right.
It was awkward enough in person, and being online, I think it made it a bit more difficult at the beginning. So one of my bigger things was reaching out to upper year students that were maybe doing a job that I was interested in, or they were part of a club they wanted to do, or took a course that I wanted to take,
Mhm.
and just starting the conversation because you have an opener. You have, how's it going? Like, would you mind
Ah,
talking to me about X, Y, or Z? And then that relationship hopefully grows from there.
so I'm hearing that you actually had a strategy, that you were looking for a opener, as you just said, as a means of forming a connection in the hopes of someone responding and saying, why, yes, I know everything about Club Y, or I can tell you everything about that prof who teaches blank. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think having a game plan, I like having a game plan so you know what you're doing. You maybe ask the right questions or you get the answers you're looking for. Because sometimes if you just write, how are you? It's kind of out of the blue, especially if you don't know somebody, it doesn't really lead you anywhere. But when you have a purpose or you're offering help or you're asking for help, I think that makes people open up a bit more and create that connection.
And do you think that during this COVID era that those attempts to connect, that there's been perhaps more hospitality or more willingness to your experience than pre-COVID?
I definitely agree. So, for example, I had an exam in my first semester, and one of my friends told me that he was having a study session with another friend, and they just sent me the Zoom link, and I joined, not knowing the third person. And we
Right.
were having a very open discussion. He was helping me, I was helping them. And I think pre COVID, it would be kind of different to just walk into a room and be like, okay, let's study together. I don't know you, but give me your answers. Right.
Absolutely, almost an assault, right? I mean, there's so much intellectual property that students need to hold on to, right? What, you want my answers? Who are you? Where are you from? And so
Exactly. And I felt like as we were going through practice exams, people were so open and they're like, oh, but did you notice this? And then we start talking about it. Be like, oh, what could the professor have meant that? Because we never had answers from the professors. They just had past exams. So
right.
there's a lot for us to discuss and be like, oh, did you find this? Like, do you think this is an actual issue we should talk about? Or is just kind of there?
So in hindsight, then, would you consider that perhaps being in a virtual environment may have been beneficial for some of those connections to happen more quickly?
It could be. I think it depends who you are. I have friends who've made really good groups of friends through being virtual, which to me, I feel like it's a very hard thing to do. It's hard to connect with one person, let alone a good group of people that all like each other and all know each other.
Yeah.
So I think it depends who you are and how much you're willing to take initiative.
Fair enough. Fair enough. It goes back to that initiative piece, right? You have to take some risk to connect to another person, right? So you started this by telling me about empathy and understanding, and the idea here also of looking at people's situations as well. And I think that there's a lot to be said for the whole person approach, or perhaps even a well-roundedness that during this COVID era, many of us did not either have the thoughtfulness towards someone's circumstances, whatever those circumstances may be, or we perhaps had some of the knowledge, but we didn't know what to do with it. So maybe we were thoughtfully thoughtless because of what we were ourselves perhaps going through. So you mentioned how your hope is that we continue to be empathetic and understanding. And I appreciate that hope. Do you have any predictions? What's your gut?
I feel like the farther away we are from COVID times, the more people will start forgetting. So we can even see that with work from home environments. Some companies are asking employees to come back 100%. Others are adopting a hybrid approach.
Yep.
And to me, it's just crazy. If how could you go from being 100% remote to 100% in person? Like there's got to be some kind of balance. And I feel like the farther away you are from the remote times and the COVID times, the easier it'll be to forget it and kind of maybe resort back to the old ways. So I think it would be similar in this situation as well.
You think we might go back to how we were behaving previously?
I think so. I really hope, for example, in more important things like mental health and feeling burnt out, those factors will still be a big part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like understanding different people. For example, I have friends who have kids, and understanding that they might be busy at certain times and they might not be able to do their work at this time, and like finding a way to work with them and not just feel frustrated, but also being open to those conversations, because sometimes it's hard to share those kind of hardships or the struggles some might be going through.
I think that's a great example. The considerations for a person's lifestyle, certainly if there's a young child or children in the household. And by extension, I would suggest to you that there's even perhaps room now for conversations about our own circadian rhythms, right? I happen to be a morning person, so I haven't had struggles in terms of my own career, whether I've been, having to travel or to teach or what I do in terms of being early. That just happens to be an okay time for me. In fact, I'm pretty useless after about 9 p.m., just for sake of an example. But there are others who genuinely do not get to their better thinking till much later in the day. And I think that there's a space there to certainly acknowledge if one has a busy household, whether it's childcare or elder care or plant care or whatever care that they may be offering to make their lives better. But then the idea of your own best performance. So if I could wave a magic wand, if I had a single employer, I would probably want to work something like 6 a.m. till 12 noon. And I could be at my best in terms of the work and my ability to sort of bring my higher level thinking, and then have a life in the rest of the day where I can still function, but I'm not exactly tapping into any of the brilliance that I like to think I have. Whereas other folks are the extreme opposite. Do you have a rhythm in your own work or time?
I'm on the same page as you. I would love to work earlier and end earlier.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing you can really do for me personally is you get up and it's still dark out and you end work and it's dark out, especially in the winter months.
It's tough, isn't it? Yeah. We have to figure that out. So maybe, in addition to COVID opening up some openness in childcare responsibilities and households, I think there's a possibility for us also being able to be more adaptable or adoptive of people's own sort of circadian rhythms. And, I'm at my best early, so you're going to get a lot of output from me between this time. And then you're not going to hear from me during these hours because I'm really not at my best then. So it's probably in both of our interests if I'm not, working, which is very different than everyone show up by 9 and everyone leave by 5. So to your point, I have several clients right now who are allowing the hybrid model to prevail in the next handful of months. And these are organizations that have locations in downtown Toronto. And everybody's going into the office Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, which means I don't think there's going to be a soul downtown on Monday and Friday, at least for June, July, and August of 2022. I have a hard time believing it. But I also don't believe that, to your point, that's sustainable. I don't believe that we're going to have 3 days on, 2 days off in terms of space, not on off in terms of work, and at the same time rationalize some real estate. It doesn't seem long-term sustainable to me either. I totally get it. So from this question, we go to one that I gotta say I am very interested to hear your opinion on. And the next question that you had jump out at you reads, what is your favorite way? Now, Albina, this says favorite way. That means that there's more than one way you considered. It says, what is your favorite way to solve interpersonal conflicts or problems on your team? So let's hear it. What's your favorite way?
I think being an MBA student and having a business undergrad, I've done thousands of projects. So it feels like group projects. And there's always going to be some kind of conflict, whether it's the group with the project. So I think the biggest takeaway from my experience in my time in school has been to really be straightforward and have open communication.
Okay.
Because I've had experiences where people don't communicate, maybe their issues that they're dealing with, maybe it's external stuff for why they can't get their work done, or just maybe interpersonal conflict in the group, and then it just escalates without that communication. So I think my biggest tip is to really have the conversation, have it at the start to discuss what you're going to be doing, the roles, and kind of lay everything out for everybody to make sure you're all on the same page. And then when conflicts do arise, be able to communicate your feelings and have that open discussion to see where you can go forward from there.
So I'm hearing a bit of a roadmap here. I'm hearing that you need to have a conversation, and in that conversation that you discuss the roles and the expectations, and that hopefully if there is any opportunity that there can be in resolving a disconnect, that we then communicate about feelings and perhaps people's individual situations. Is that in alignment with what your thoughts are?
Exactly, yes.
So again, from the student perspective, come on, Albina, there is always that one person who does not do what they say they will do. Are you that student? Are you that person? Because student work and group work, cohort-based work, I mean, it can be a nightmare for some students. And I can't believe that you have had an exceptional experience. I'm sure you've had at least one group where someone didn't pull their weight. Is that true?
Oh, of course. Of course. I have plenty of stories. As JD students, we always chat about it because there's such a stark difference between the law side and the MBA side. On the law side, you're by yourself usually. You're studying on your own. It's 100% exams or 100% papers. On the MBA side, assignments every week, basically, participation, group projects, sometimes more than one per course. Okay. So plenty of chances to have very interesting group dynamics and group projects.
So someone who spends a lot of time teaching around communication and soft skills, I can tell you that one of the themes that people love to discuss in my classes and in the coaching relationships I lead is about the concept of control, and control when it comes to one's own output. So if I am on the JD side and I'm studying and I do well on the exam, or I'm studying and I don't do well on the exam, both are on me. Is that fair?
Yes.
Right? And I might have a very complicated or remarkably simple student life. However, both are on me. Then there's the MBA side. Now, as someone who teaches on the executive side of Schulich, I can tell you, I know the love of group work very, very well. And it does have a place in the pedagogy of teaching. It does have a role. However, I can tell you at times I'm a bit reticent as to just how popular group work has become in the last couple of years. Perhaps that's a whole other podcast. Nonetheless, now you're on the MBA side. And if I take that same lens of control as someone who's a part of sometimes randomized groups, or either, and I don't know what's better, randomized or self-selected groups. There's good and bad in both, right? Either friendships are made and lost or strangers are made and lost. There's lots going on, but nonetheless, control plummets, right? So that person then, have you had anyone just ghost you entirely? Have you had anyone just sort of
Yeah. Because I think for JD and BA students, we really care about our grades, or at least everyone I've worked with, we really want to put our best foot forward. Sometimes you have different expectations of the outcomes in your group projects. If others maybe like the MBA degree is just for them to learn and they don't really care about the grades, they might not put the same effort, or at least you might think they're not putting the same effort as you. And that's when I think things can get murky.
So back to that original strategy that you had described, which was a conversation, clarifying the roles, discussing the expectations. So can you preemptively have those conversations about roles and expectations if there are some different levels of commitment or energy that are being brought to the same project? How do you do that?
I think so. There's some basics that I think are basic things, but I think it's important to discuss, even citations, not plagiarizing, making sure that the work is original and it's grammatically correct. It might be harder for some students.
Shaking my head here, and it is amazing to me, Albina, that we are looking at a rather senior level of education. And we are discussing grammar and plagiarism. And I say this with great appreciation that, as someone who teaches around writing in a professional capacity, I end up teaching grammar to very sophisticated individuals within their career who are multiply degreed and discussing the idea of plagiarism. And I'm not sure where we have a societal disconnect when it comes to those two parts of how it is that we are communicating our professionalism. However, I'm not surprised at all that that's two pieces that you need to clarify as expectations. And I'd say probably each and every time you're in a group. Is that fair?
Yeah. I've had one of my first years, one of my group projects, one of my team members just copy and pasted something from the internet. And maybe he was going to cite it later, but when I searched someone's sentence, the whole thing came up. And that's when I realized maybe some people don't understand or don't know it, because we have a lot of international students. Maybe they were taught different stuff back home.
No, and I appreciate your open-mindedness there. And, there's a lot to be said for ensuring everyone has the same frame of reference. However, it's an interesting piece in terms of communicating and the potential avoidance or management of conflict, and that is having the same reference point. So to your point, we might all come from a variety of different perspectives, whether we are local or international, or I'd say even sophisticated or under-sophisticated. But as students, everybody has met some standards of scrutiny, right? There's been a larger than you and me set of hurdles and or opportunities for people to get into a program, especially a combination program such as yours, right? So as soon as we combine programs, we tend to up the ante in terms of the expectations for admittance. So even if I am from away, whatever that means, or if I am local, whatever that means, those expectations are not personal anymore, right? They're not even set by a particular university. They are, and I want to even say universals, or they are bigger than you and me, right? They're bigger than a Canadian university. They're bigger than that. So it's a big deal around avoiding conflict and managing conflict as a student. And it just keeps coming up. So if you've had both of those experiences, the JD side and the MBA side, would you, if you had a magic wand, change the group work or change the individual work or not?
I think a balance between the two would be the best for both programs. I guess law is not very conducive to group work, but there's always a way to make it group work friendly. Sometimes on the MBA side, we might have a bit too much. For example, having 2 group projects per course, I think that's a lot to ask for. And I've had that in several courses, but it's just different skill sets. And I have to use, I feel like, even different parts of my brain for each program. Like it's so different.
Have you actually had to negotiate people's schedules? And if you are, international, with everyone working perhaps during COVID from different locations on the planet, you had time zones to reconcile as well, right?
Exactly. And it really taught me to be resourceful. I found an application, for example, for finding meeting times. It's called When to Meet, with 2 as a number.
Okay.
And people fill out kind of a grid and you select your times and your dates. And then it'll show you, like, a bright green is when everybody's available. A white is when no one's available, to kind of see what your schedules are like, instead of just messaging the group and trying to coordinate 5 people over the course of a week or 2-week schedule.
That's fantastic. When to meet, with 2 as the number. And knowing you as organized as I know you are, I am not surprised at all that you found a tool to I am not surprised that you found a tool. That's fantastic. And absolutely negotiating timetables and schedules, and that can be a good bulk of any team or any group trying to get together. And I would say to you, oftentimes, even a part of some of the potential for conflict that might have nothing to do with your objective or your project purpose or even why the heck you're together, right? Because of either time zones or conflicting schedules or responsibilities. Yet, just as you had said in your previous answer, all of us are trying to be more empathetic and understanding about all of these differences. Yet we have a deadline of 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time of Friday, and we don't have a meeting set up before then. Yikes, right? What do we do? Amazing, amazing. I think this is actually a part of your own professional presence here, Albina, when you mentioned looking for a tool. And I'm going to use it as a segue to the third question that you selected, which is, what have you done or seen on the job to develop a person's professional presence, including potentially your own presence? So what comes to mind, Albina?
I recently went through a recruit that we have with the law school. Oh. And I think what I think about is always networking. Just creating that network, understanding all the law firms that you are interested in working at, understanding what they have to offer, and where do you really see yourself. So I think for me, reaching out to people is a big component of kind of developing my professionalism, showing people who I am and kind of starting to build my network. And now I feel more confident reaching out to people and like, hey, you're at this firm, or you do this kind of law, like, can you tell me more about it? Like, I'm super interested. I want to know what your day-to-day work is like. And then to see if I can picture myself doing that, or if I can picture myself being at that firm.
Fantastic. So in terms of presence, what I'm hearing in your lived example as a student networking and becoming involved in the workforce, I'm hearing that the value in part there is of asking questions and maybe the role of questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd like to think that I don't know anything yet. Like, I've done the technical stuff, the educational component of it, but from everyone I've spoken to, practice and theory is very different. So I'd like to go into conversations that I don't really know anything and be open-minded to learning more and kind of maybe understanding better what it is that they do where they work.
I was recently working with some lawyers, and I was part of a conversation where one lawyer made a comment that I'm reminded of now in our conversation. And he said something along the lines of, law school doesn't teach you how to be a lawyer. That's not what law school does.
Yeah,
don't be
exactly.
Silly. No. That's what articling's about. And that's what, working is about. And we never quite got to the point where I understood what exactly law school does teach you, which I'm not sure if there was an answer for, but it was a remarkable comment. Because he was quite adamant. No. Law school does not teach one how to be a lawyer. It sounds like that resonates with you.
Yeah, I've heard that multiple times, and I have yet to figure out what it does teach me. Once I graduated, I'll probably see that.
That's fantastic. I think there's probably a lot of people who would really like to know what law school does teach a potential lawyer. I think the value of articling is certainly clear. That people get that. The apprenticeship idea, the junior in the making. That's a great approach there. That I think is also echoed in your comments about how you like to think that you don't know anything yet. It reminds me of one of those concepts that we talk about a lot in terms of soft skills, which is having a growth mindset. And having a growth mindset, which is an idea, attributed to Carol Dweck and a lot of the great work that she's done, Dr. Carol Dweck. And a growth mindset is really what you're personifying there, which is, I got space to change and develop, or I've got, I'm a work in progress, or there's more to be revealed to me, or I've come this far. and there's more, right? And having more questions, which was one of my first questions to you when we were discussing this idea, rather than trying to have all of the answers. At times, it really is a matter of thinking about better questions in order to figure out how to learn from others. Would you agree?
Yes. I think the hardest part is thinking of those questions. It's so easy to ask something very simple, but it's another thing to really take that time to reflect and really analyze and ask the deep questions to get you the answers that you're looking for.
Fair enough. And one of the first comments you made that I made note of in terms of networking around your presence was do the research. So find out which firms and which individuals within those firms and what they are practicing, and finding out how it is that you can connect to them and reaching out to show interest. And you're right, there's a difference between, so tell me about what you do versus what is it that happens on a typical workday for you, or tell me about what you do versus how did you select patent law versus family law, right? What were the considerations there for you? So let's try and unpack a little bit more about your thinking about questions. And I appreciate you've already given me some, but what kind of questions have you been asking in your networking?
I think really finding a creative way to get your answers. Sometimes, depending who you're talking to, they might be more open than other people. Mm-hmm. And even if they're open, they might not be thinking that the answer they're giving you is a full answer. So for example, if you ask them, hey, do you like your work environment? It'll be really hard for somebody to be like, no, I hate it. It's the worst place ever. But if you ask questions, how would you describe your work environment? Or who are your favorite coworkers? Or who do you collaborate with the most? It kind of helps you understand the dynamic of the office and see if that dynamic works with you and your preferences.
And I think that's a great observation. Those are often non-answerable questions. They're not necessarily rhetorical, but they're non-answerable questions. So, do you like where you work? Yes. It's non-answerable, right? I remember years ago being introduced to this concept of non-answerable questions with a great example of someone saying, "You look tired." If you think about that for a second, what is the correct answer? So it's either yes, I do look tired, or no, I don't look tired. Neither of those answers is actually answering the question that's not being said, because the question that is being said is not answerable, right? So when you ask someone, do you like where you work? And you're literally asking them on work time, on their work Zoom or in their office, it's highly unlikely that you're going to have anything of value on the other side of such a question. And that, to be frank, if I were the person being asked such a question by a student or a prospective, employee, I'd start to have some thoughts about, I'm not sure if this person is a fit, maybe, or what else can they bring? Because it doesn't, as you suggest, show that there's been some thoughtfulness about how to get to what they actually want to know. And so you're right. Your examples of some specificity make a lot more sense, right? So asking about certain nuances, or asking about processes, or asking about their experience with blank, or so on, will pull away or peel away some of those layers to get to what you're actually looking for, which is some sort of genuine answer that you can get. So I'm a big fan of the role of questions. We spend way too little time figuring out the importance of questions. Maybe that's what law school does. Does law school teach you about the importance of questions in part?
I think so. I feel like I definitely changed since the first exam I wrote versus now, understanding both sides of the situation, asking those questions, like, why did they say the person was wearing a gray shirt? Or why did they write this? Like, what is the purpose of this sentence in this exam? and really asking yourself further questions like why and why and why, instead of just taking things at face value.
And so you put that into an exam context, Albina. So is that layer of questioning what you're doing before answering what is perhaps on the exam itself?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah. So some of your thinking perhaps has changed. Is that right?
I think so. I definitely matured, and the way I think, I analyze things, I am a lot more deeper than when I was, a year ago. And I do see that difference when I wrote the exams this past semester, that I had that extra level of depth and really pushing myself beyond what is just on the paper and be like, what are the implications? Am I missing anything?
That's even a great question there. What are the implications, or what am I missing here? And oftentimes when I'm teaching in and around the umbrella of soft skills, there's variations of that exact question, right? What are the implications? So what are the implications in how I'm communicating? What are the implications of this information? What are the implications to this meeting that I am holding? What are the implications to me not attending that meeting? What are the implications to how it is that I'm delivering information in this presentation? What are the implications? And I like to position that question as a means of being more empathetic, because although it is at first somewhat self-oriented, and as a student, I say this with a great appreciation, you need to figure out for yourself how to think to do well on that exam. So that question, what are the implications? You've got to figure out in reference to your understanding and the competencies and the skills and the level of knowledge that you bring to address a particular scenario, a simulation or a case study in an exam. But it's that same set of questions, or the implication of those questions, that people bring to how they communicate on the job, that hopefully will elevate that empathy, that understanding, because oftentimes the implications of some of our communication choices pre-COVID, in comparison to where we are now, and who knows where we will be on the horizon, there's been a chance to increase what we understand about the implications, right? Because before, we didn't even realize that someone perhaps had that scenario at home, or had that kind of commute, or was in that time zone, or had this skill set that they hadn't even brought to the forefront previously. So what are the immediate implications for us, Albina, is that this has been a fantastic conversation, and I appreciate your perspective greatly as a student and as a about to be blossoming professional on the legal field that will hopefully change the Canadian legal landscape like that. I have every faith, ever since I met you, that you would be doing this. And yes, I will seek you out for legal advice in the future. Nonetheless, thank you so much for investing this time, and thank you for letting everyone know your thoughts around all these soft skills.
Thank you so much, Diana. This was great, and you really got me thinking deeper with these questions.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much for listening to another dynamic and informative episode of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please consider subscribing to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we also encourage you to visit our website and social media links, which you can find in the show's notes. We look forward to bringing you another episode, and remember, conversation is the currency of communication. Bye for now.